This morning, my wife shocked me. She said to me, you're not all that. I said to her, what do you mean? She said, you come across in your videos like some smart ass. You seem or give the impression you're super wealthy, you're super successful, you have all the answers. Your model of early financial freedom sounds like some schmaltzy, glib answer to life solutions, but you're not all that. And it made me reflect for a while, and I realized that if I've given the impression that I'm all that, that is certainly not accurate. I think in life one has to reconcile their expectations with reality. And if I've given a wrong impression, I wanted to, in this video, give you a grand reconciliation between what I thought life would turn out and the way it has turned out. And I think this is very relevant for somebody like Jake, who I described in episode 1, somebody who's starting off in his life wondering what to do. So the first aspect of reconciliation is really understanding that success is a very relative term. Now, I've described in other videos how I started my career in Wall Street in the late 80s with what was arguably the number one investment bank on Wall Street called Salomon Brothers. And at Salomon Brothers, I had a very good friend, and let's call him Hanibal to protect his identity, but his name actually is very similar to Hannibal. He used to be the head of the global convertible derivatives arbitrage desk. And we were both in our mid-20s, and he was a hell of a lot more successful than I was financially. And he made $10 million in bonuses or higher 3 years in a row. Now, Jamie Dimon, at that time, the same guy who runs JP Morgan Chase, had just taken over Salomon Brothers with his boss, Sandy Weil. And so Jamie gets into a meeting. I don't know if it was Jamie or one of his sidekicks, but they got into a meeting with Hanibal, and they said, look, you've earned all this money. Newsflash, you're not going to make that kind of money again because we don't think any one individual should get that kind of money. And Hanibal said, look, I made $400 million for the firm, so it might sound like a lot to earn $10 million in a bonus, but it's actually not. So they said, well, too bad. We're all about teams, and we're not going to pay you $10 million or more in the future, just letting you know. So Hanibal, to his credit, what a ballsy guy, just stood up and said, you know what? F you. And they said, excuse me? He said, what are you, hard of hearing? F you. I've made F you kind of money, and I can tell you to F off. So he gets up, he leaves the room, exits the building, and both resigns and retires. This is by the time he's 27 years old. Now, that is somebody I compare myself to financially, and I say, am I a success relative to him? And the answer is absolutely not. Another example is a guy that we'll call Arnold. He was somebody that I used to work with, not somebody who's like a close buddy like Hanibal, but he only made $5 million a year in bonuses when I knew him. He was a natural gas derivatives trader at a different firm. But he left that firm and set up his own hedge fund, and his take-home pay was $5 billion. That's billion with a B. So when I compare myself to people like Hanibal and Arnold, I realize that I'm not successful, and I have to deal with that. And as I reach the fall season of my life, I realized that the decision tree has thinned out. Some of the branches of that tree have fallen out, and there are fewer alternatives. So to the extent we had dreams and visions about what we could be, those dreams and visions narrow as you age. And so one has to reconcile what one is with what one hoped to be. And the way I've done that is to dramatically reduce my threshold of success and to redefine success. So in my first episode, I talked about my model of living, which was broken up into two parts, part one and part two. Part one was early financial freedom. The idea that from the first paycheck one should buy strips of cash flow, and that when the cash flow is greater than your cash outflow, you're truly wealthy. You can quit your job, and if you want, you have FU money. Now, I suggested that the cash flow should be 7 times the cash outflow, but you don't need to be that rigorous. You can just have 2 times cash flow versus cash outflow. But what I was doing there is I was redefining the definition of wealth. I was saying wealth is not the kind of money that Hanibal or Arnold makes. Wealth is just simply passive cash flow that's greater than your cash outflow. And one of the reasons I was doing that is I don't have the kind of capital that a Hanibal or a Arnold has. And that was my way of dealing with this reality. Then you had part two of my model, which was to pursue education and culture. Now, why do I actually have that? It's because I'm defining success by adding more metrics than financial metrics. Because by financial metrics, I'm not successful. I'm not all that compared to Arnold and Hanibal. So by defining part two as education and capital that you cultivate, based on the leisure one creates through the financial freedom of part one, I've been able to somehow reconcile my life and deal with the fact that under a different definition of success, a purely financial one, I wouldn't be successful. So today, that's exactly what I have. It's not a lot. It's not Hanibal type capital. It's not Arnold type capital. But it's financial freedom combined with a day in which I pursue nothing but education and capital. Now, do I have regrets for bad decisions? Absolutely. And when I say regrets, I don't mean it in a negative way, although maybe I do mean it in a negative way sometimes. I ask myself the question, would I have done it differently if I were to give advice to the 25-year-old version of myself? And the answer is yes. So, for example, I suggested to Jake that he save 40% of his first paycheck and start buying strips of cash flow. I didn't do that. I'm giving Jake the advice that I would give myself. I spent money like a baller. I was on Wall Street. I would be, buying bottles of Tatangier champagne in the Rainbow Room and doing really stupid things. But I have a regret now, because if I understood what I understand now, I would have achieved financial freedom earlier. So ultimately, I believe life is about reconciliation. And is my wife right? She is. In fact, she's right most of the time, much to my chagrin. She's right in that I'm not all that. But you know what? I'm enough. I'm enough if I define success and a path in a certain way. So what about you? Do you have any regrets about bad decisions? If so, what were they? Let us know in the comments.